coming from where my wife and I were coming from was pretty significant, right? So second year, 10 properties, third year, 16 more buildings. And I throw this slide up here because it's a point in time in my life that's very important for you guys watching to understand. We had about 35 properties at the time. We had about 160 tenants, and our cash flow is about 20 grand a month after expense, right? I got a phone call that would really kind of redirect with what I would do with my life. Now, I mentioned my dad as a teacher, my mom as a nurse. The idea of helping other people was kind of ingrained in me as a kid. And it's selfish. Like people sometimes, oh, I'm high and mighty because I love to help people. Guys, I like helping people because of the way it makes me feel, right? So if you really, really take it down to, I know that can sound kind of strange, but I want other people to have success because it makes me feel good when they do, if that makes sense, right? So what I did is I started training for Robert Kiyosaki once, sometimes twice a month in different parts of the country. It was a really fun gig. They paid me really well to do it. I would travel. I got to bring my significant other with me. It was a really, really fun time. And then what happened was I stopped. I decided, you know what, this part of my life is over. 5 years of not doing anything but running the business, I get the phone call from Clint and Toby, and they say, listen, once a month or so, stand in your home office, look at a computer lens or a camera lens, and go out there and effectively help people. Do the best you can to teach them. Go through the techniques that works, so they can go out there and have that success that you can have, right? And it's been one of the biggest honors that I've been doing over the last couple of years. I really enjoy it. I think you guys will see that today. And again, everybody shows a picture of their family, but I wanted to put this on the screen because it's how I feel being a client of Anderson. I have the best of the best looking out for me and my family. I know that if and when, which obviously it happens, it's happened to me multiple times in my career, when you're faced with a lawsuit, whether it's merit or not, it doesn't matter, it's a lawsuit. When you're faced with one of these things that happen, you need to understand you got to be protected. You don't want any holes in that protection. It's not worth going out there and losing things that you worked your butt off for because you didn't take the time to invest in knowing how to protect it. So that's my job today, to do as best as I can for you to help you learn, hey, how to preserve, how to protect, how to prosper in today's market, right? So what you're doing now, I hope you've paid attention for the first 10, 15 minutes, right? Let's go in and get specific. If you guys are taking notes, this is when we're going to start. If you're taking notes, and by the way, if you're going to go to an event like this or listen to an event like this, take the time to write some things down. All right. So get out a pen and piece of paper or an iPad, whatever you need, and go ahead and jot this down. This is the first thing I want to talk about. What we're going to do today is we're going to talk a lot about protecting, obviously, assets, but it's important to differentiate the different type of assets we're going to pick. All right. So blue. We got up here in the upper left-hand corner of this quadrant, we got our personal assets, right? The right-hand top part of the quadrant, we're going to put our no-risk investments. Okay, so these are investments that have value, but they aren't inherently themselves risky. And you'll see why we have those separated as we go. Very important to separate this. The amount of clients that come on board with Anderson that are doing this wrong, it's staggering. And we hopefully, for all 350, 400 of you on so far, you don't make this mistake. The lower left-hand side, we got business activities. These are not assets. Business activities should be protected in a different way than business assets. And we'll show you that as we progress through this today. And here's probably why most of y'all showed up. It's why, when I get a chance to go to live events for Anderson now and I talk to people, oh yeah, I remember seeing you on the webinar, right? A lot of times people will tell me, hey, I want to make sure that I'm protecting these investments that are risky, right? And this for most people involves real estate and real property. Okay, so the risky investments, we're going to take a lot of time here today to focus on that. But if you go macro level, you have to differentiate these four different quadrants. So if you're taking a time to jot things down, the best way to kind of do this is to go through them together. All right, so if you're taking notes, what I'll do is I'll get to a blank screen here and I'll make sure we go through this. So I'll take the personal quadrant and draw it bigger so we can all write this all down. So this is our personal quadrant. These are part of our everyday living. And it's really important to list this out. And by the way, some of you might have things to put on here additionally to what I talk about. That's cool. Put them on there. Just make sure you take the time to put something down in the personal quadrant, right? Personal residence number one. All right. This is the most common thing people want to do is they say, okay, I got a personal residence. I mean, I live in the state of Florida. I live in one of the best states in the nation when it comes to asset protection for your personal residence. But if you were to ask me right now, hey, do you have your property titled in your own name? I'll look at this screen and tell you absolutely not, right? I understand the value of a residence trust, what it can do when it comes to taxes, and what it does do every day when it comes to anonymity and asset protection. We'll get to this. Okay, so personal residence, number one. Number two, hey, how do you pay for your everyday expenditures, right? Your checking account for most of you, right? Some of you are driving around in a car or truck. It's personal in nature. I know you're going to say, well, Brent, there's strategies, tax strategies where you can save on this. You're absolutely right. Fortunately for you, you have a lead tax attorney at our company right now, Jeff, who's going to come on and show you some brilliant techniques on how to do that. But for the most part, for most people watching, car and truck personal in nature. So for now, let's leave it in that quadrant. All right. Boat, right? If any of you like driving around on a boat, the old acronym for the boat, bring on another thousand, right? It's absolutely true. As a boat owner, I know. RVs, airplane. I mentioned being a pilot earlier. I love to fly. And yes, these are expensive hobbies, right? But, I always remember what Robert Kiyosaki told me years ago. He said, if you want certain liabilities in your life to enjoy, just all you got to do is make sure you buy an asset first that'll pay for that liability. And it sounds pretty easy in theory, and it kind of is in practice too, right? Take the time to focus on asset acquisition and then go out there and enjoy the fact that you bought all that asset, right? Bought all those assets. Last but not least, you got your IRA there. Very important to understand that that's in the personal quadrant as well. So you might be saying, okay, Brent, where are you going with this? This is really important to write down. If you haven't started writing anything down yet, write this next thing down, put a big star next to it, and say, look into this immediately. Okay. The first entity that we're going to set up in this quadrant is the living trust. Okay. This ties everything together. Now, keep in mind, living trusts in and of themselves do not offer asset protection. So the living trust itself is not the asset protection part of the plan, right? But it's important to understand that if you do value protecting your assets, it's a good place to house that asset protection plan. Okay. And when it comes to living trust, just give you one quick example, real quick. I got a buddy of mine. His father was in the medical profession. His father was a doctor, right? Did really well for many years, but he never took the time to put together a living trust. He didn't really take the time to put together a will. He did nothing as far as planning when it comes to his own demise, right? Unfortunately, he did pass away unexpectedly, and he was left, my buddy and his two sisters, in a situation where they had to deal with attorneys and deal with the courts for over 6 months. And if you think about this, how do you want your legacy, right, to be remembered? How do you want to be remembered? And the fact is, obviously, they remember great times with their father, right? But I've talked to him about this over breakfast a couple times actually, and he said, Brent, it's so interesting because had he taken the time to have all those documents in place, everything that we went through in those months after his passing wouldn't have happened. And would have been able to focus more on grieving, focus more on remembering his legacy, right? And it was just something they were not allowed to do. So if you've ever thought about a living trust, please do yourself a favor and think about it more and go out there and execute. And if you think, well, Brent, I don't have a ton of assets right now. Do I really need to do it? I don't care how much you have or don't have. Everyone watching right now should consider putting one of those documents together. And fortunately, I'm going to show you a lot of how to do that today and exactly what not to do when it comes to a living trust, right? So think that. I mentioned this earlier when it comes to personal residence. We got a residence trust. Let me go ahead and do this. Okay. Here we go, green. Residence trust. Okay, so this makes it so creditors can't get equity. There's definitely some potential tax benefits that come with it, but most people do this because of the anonymity component and the tax and asset protection component as well. Okay, so residence trust, definitely something to look into. And fortunately, I'm going to show you step by step how to set one of these up today too. And I'm also going to show you all the kind of the pitfalls that people do when they set them up. Oh yeah, I've heard about this online. I watched a YouTube video on it. They'll go set it up and they'll make a mistake and it'll totally void some of the benefits they were hoping to get out of it. So we're going to address all those as well. And then obviously for any of you who want to take control, think about the IRA there. You can opt to self-direct, or you can set up something called a solo 401k. We set up thousands of solo 401ks for clients here at Anderson. It's something that many of our clients want to do, especially in today's economy and market. They want to have more control of their retirement dollar and be able to invest in alternative assets. And that's something that helps them get that done. Okay. So that's the personal quadrant as a whole in a nutshell. Again, I know it's very macro right now, but it's really important to understand this quadrant before we dive into the details of this today. All right. So that's personal. Move to the upper right hand corner. So let's, I'll get a blank screen here and draw this out again. These are our no risk investments. Okay, so no risk investments. They don't in and of themselves cause lawsuits, but typically these are the types of assets that attorneys they drool over, right? When they're in your own name and they're not properly protected, this is something very easy to go after in a judgment or in a lawsuit type situation. No risk investments. So we'll create a list here real quick to show you kind of what some of these things could be. The first one, you sound kind of odd to you that this is here, but technically your savings account for most people is in the no risk investment quadrant, right? And technically most people have what's called a personal savings account, right? We want you to have a protected savings account. So after you spend this Saturday here in late June with us, we want you to be in a situation where you say, okay, cool, I'm glad I came to this event. I'm going to go take action right now, and I'm going to make sure my savings account that I have is protected. It's not a personal account, it's a protected account. And go into the bank right now and say, hey, I attended this class and they told me that I shouldn't have a personal account. I should have a, protected one. They're not going to know what you're talking about, right? They have options, personal or business, savings account or checking account, right? No, we want these things to be protected. And I'm going to show you exactly how in just a couple seconds here, how to do that, right? CDs, right? CDs, treasuries, anybody investing in these safer, more guaranteed investment vehicles, they're out there, important to have them protected. I got a buddy of mine, I just went fishing with him recently, who's into crypto, and he does real well. But I asked him how it was structured and titled, and he told me straight up, like 99% of people who invest in crypto, it's in his own name. And then I went on my little diatribe and I told him statistically why that doesn't make sense. And you better believe he's on with his attorney to get that changed, right? It doesn't make sense. Understand even something like crypto, which is very low risk, not the investment itself, but as far as, somebody slipping and fall on a Bitcoin, right? Doesn't happen. Point is we want to make sure this is protected. We got the stocks, right? Our personal brokerage account. We want to make sure this is protected. If any of you are investing in, say, real estate syndications or other types of syndications, maybe some of you are investing. Part of my portfolio I got into a few years ago. It's been pretty nice. It's really, really great when you consider the tax benefits, but the cash flow has been nice too. Oil and gas, which is out there. A big thing that I'm doing right now, I'm almost to an 8-figure business just on notes, on capital, and we'll get to that later too. I'll show you how you can do that. And then obviously, if you like the old air cooled classics like I do when it comes to, collectibles, those are out there too. My point is these are just different types of investments that are out there that people have that are considered the no risk quadrant. But the reality is, how do we protect those investments? How do we make sure that if we're faced with a lawsuit or one of our businesses are faced with a lawsuit or something random happens, that we don't have a situation where we could lose any of this? Well, what we got to do is we got to protect these things. Okay, so we'll draw this blue box around it. So what we want to do is we want to open up an LLC. All right, now I got the chat box over here on my other screen. So I'm going to write down LLC. I'm going to go over to the chat box here, and I want you guys to participate. All right, so if you guys take the time in the chat box to tell me what type of LLC should I use? All right, what specific type of LLC could I use in this situation if I want to make sure those assets are protected, right? And I'll give you a hint. I'm looking for a state here. I'm not looking for a type. It's a state specific. And I'm seeing the right answers fly up all over the screen, which I love to see because it shows that you guys are informed already. Literally the first 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, they're all the same. So great. You guys understand this and understand it well. That's great. For those of you, and by the way, I know you guys can't see the chat box. We want to protect people who come to these events from the prince who's asking for 10 grand for a return of 20 grand. You know what I mean? So the point is we're trying to protect our attendees, which is why we don't have the chat box live for everybody to see. But fortunately, I can see it all, right? What we have here is the ability to understand the value of a Wyoming LLC. So it's great to see how many of you guys are informed. Let's go specifically on why. Okay. A Wyoming LLC gives us something called charging order protection. Now, a charging order is essentially just a lien placed on LLC's distributions. So the protection prevents creditors from taking control of the business, and it helps keep an individual's interest in an LLC safe, right? And there are many other places across the U.S. where people hold LLCs where this simply is not the case. And if you look at a charging order, if you have a solid operating agreement and you have a proper set of books, charging order protection allows these assets to remain as safe as they possibly can. Okay, now I understand there are other states across the US where this works. We actually used to do a lot of these things in Nevada back in the day, but we've learned over the course of a time as a company, we adapt, right? And we've had some new law changes in Wyoming that makes it more attractive. Plus, the overall cost in Wyoming is dramatically less. So a lot of clients, we set up thousands of Wyoming LLCs for our clients. And in fact, for some of our clients, hundreds and hundreds of these things a month, right? Because we have a service, I'll mention it later, but you might want to look into this. It's a service called Titanium. It's a titanium package that certain clients across the country have with Anderson, which gives them unlimited entities, which really helps people in their portfolios. When you got a $30, $40 million portfolio, you want to make sure you have protection and you don't want to lump too many assets in the same entity, which is why having the ability to start many and have those layers of protection is important. Okay, so charging order protection, first and foremost reason. Second reason we want to look into a Wyoming LLC is because of the anonymity component, right? We want to remain anonymous. The Secretary of State does not require that you list your personal information when setting one of these things up. And again, I'm going to show you today, the whole point of this class, guys, is not to have a 45-minute hour preview, right? It's to get into the nuts and bolts of this. I'm going to show you how to step by step set this entity up. And in fact, write it all down and show you what to do and what not to do. Because it's part of learning too, is to kind of learn from mistakes, right? How many of y'all, by show of hands, kind of reverting back to 15 years ago, right? By a little emoji flying up on the bottom of the screen. How many of y'all believe that going out there and learning from other people's mistakes is an effective way of learning things, right? And again, I know that's not the only way, right? You want to learn from people doing it well too. But when you see somebody do something that's kind of dumb, and when I say dumb, maybe they're just misinformed, right? When you see somebody make a mistake, it kind of sticks in your mind that says, let's not do it that way. And that's the goal throughout this event today, is to make sure we that makes sense to you the best we possibly can. Okay, so moving forward. Client, real quick, one of our clients had a $1.7 million judgment levied against he and his business. He was out of California. And he was invited to go to a debtor's exam, a lovely debtor's. Hey, come on over to a wonderful debtor's exam. And he's, like anybody, he's kind of nervous, hadn't been through something like that before. He's a client of ours at Anderson, so he calls up our attorneys. The attorneys tell him, listen, go in there and, tell him what you got. And that was initially, I forgot to tell you, but when our client initially called, he's like, they want to know all my assets. I don't want to tell them. And we said, well, you got to. It's a debtor's exam. You're in there with attorneys. You have to be as honest as you can be. But we said, don't worry about it. Go in there and tell them exactly how you're structured. Tell them exactly what assets you have. And they'll go ahead and make their decisions based on that. So our client goes in there, nervous, sits down with two attorneys from the state and starts going through how he was structured. And this is exactly what happens. The two attorneys turn off the camera inside and they go outside to confer with one another. They come back inside, and I'm going to consult my note here to make sure I don't get the quote read. They said, quote, due to the level of sophistication of your planning, we are prepared now to reduce the claim by now over $1 million. So they took that $1.7 million claim and brought it down to 400 grand. So our client, super, super ecstatic, comes back to us and says, hey, the 1.7, just based on me showing them what I had, they've already agreed to reduce it down to 400. Should we settle? Is this great? And we said, absolutely not. This is the first step in the negotiation process. And you better believe, then from that day forward, it was back and forth, and they settled on something way even less than that. Because what they realized was this person had been structured extremely professionally, and it would be very, very difficult to get anything from this particular person or business. And that's crucial when it comes to protecting somebody's assets and protecting somebody's legacy, to put those things in order. And Wyoming LLCs had a heck of a lot to do with that, especially when you structure them and you layer them with other techniques. By the way, we're going to get into that. I'm going to show you how to set these things up, but then I'm going to tell you, hey, sometimes it doesn't work in and of itself. You have to do something else which goes out there and gives you that as close to 100% protection as you want, right? So there's that. Okay, moving down to the lower left-hand corner, we talked about business. I made a pretty bold statement there. I said, hey, you never want to have your assets in your business, right? Follow me on this. If you're taking time to write things down, business is where your business resides. These are activities that require you or employees' involvement to generate the income, okay? And I'm going to say this multiple times still today. These are not assets, they're activities, okay? So what's an example of something that would be in the business quadrant? Well, if you're out there flipping real estate, right? Any of my people flipping houses right now, or maybe some of you might be wholesaling property right now in different capacities. Maybe you're doing simultaneous closes, maybe you're doing assignments, whatever it is. If you're wholesaling real estate, and the business of wholesaling belongs in the business quadrant, right? My sister's a real estate agent, perfect example of somebody who's got a business set up, an entity set up, where she's structured this way to make it happen. And, my sister is a perfect example of somebody who was structured when it comes down to taxes incorrectly for the majority of the first part of her career, and finally started to come around to looking at different ways of structuring things. Even though, hey, all these other agents are doing it this way. No, no, no. Structure it this way. You'll have better asset protection on your business. Plus, you'll have some additional tax benefits and savings, right? There's always things that you can look into doing a little bit better, right? Turo. I bring up Turo because we've used this a couple times. My wife and her obsession with really fast, very expensive cars. These are not things that we typically have on our portfolio. We got one of them, right? But the ones that she wants to drive completely out of the question. But Turo allows that to happen. If any of you are out there doing Turo, good for you. This is a business, right? Anybody driving Uber to make some extra money, love you. Love the hustle. For those of you actively trading right now, it's a perfect thing to see. It belongs in the business quadrant, okay? And I asked you to write things down. I've talked about it a couple times. Write it down. Why not? Activities, right? Inside this particular quadrant, we got activities. These are not assets. Number one mistake we see clients make when it comes to their business is melding the two together, okay? So there's really two things then that we're concerned about in this business quadrant. We're concerned with taxation, and I'm going to show you just in a second where that's kind of huge, right? And important to understand. And then we're going to be concerned with obviously liability protection. So those are two things, pretty much hand in hand with what we've been talking about so far, okay? Now, so there's two main ways to protect these particular businesses, okay? We can use either the corporation or we can use an LLC, okay? When it comes down to tax elections, obviously Jeff, when he goes through the tax module, will go through this more in detail, but just to kind of highlight it, we have the ability to be treated as a sub S or a sub C in the corporation. And with the LLC, we can do the same. We can have the sub C or sub S corporation, or LLC technically, or we can also include to utilize a partnership or what's called a disregarded entity, okay? Both of which we'll address here today more. In fact, disregarded entities, if any of you are flipping real estate right now, please become very familiar with what a disregarded entity is and how that can help you in your flipping business. We're going to go through that in detail too. Okay, now, back to this slide. We want to protect these businesses. And one of the best ways to do this is to give you an example of how a business could end up paying tremendous amount of money in taxes that they didn't want to pay for that little tiny benefit at the beginning. And I'll give you a perfect example of this, all right? Check this out. One of our clients, and by the way, this has actually happened. This is a real life case study from here at Anderson, which is, it's not hard to do this, guys. When you're doing a training like this, you have literally thousands of clients to pick from in their stories, but this one actually really proves the point we've been trying to make for years. A client of ours developed an energy bar. So there's the client. And I know my drawing here is blowing you away with its accuracy. There's the energy bar, okay? He consults his CPA, and the CPA says, hey, listen, we're going to set up an LLC. We're going to tax this LLC as a sub-S corp, and we're going to be able to show losses. We're going to be able to lower your tax liability as you start this business, okay? And 9 times out of 10, when somebody would go out and start a business like this, and they go down to their bread and butter LLC or CPA that they've been using for years, a lot of times people will structure it in this way. Now, this particular person got wind of what Anderson did for one of his fellow business owners. Nothing but great things to say. So he says, I'm going to check this thing out. I'm going to go have a meeting. So he sits down with one of our advisors and he decides, you know what, it's worth it. I see the value in having this extra professionalism behind me. I'm going to go forward with this, right? So he becomes a client of Anderson. So here's what happens. He sits down, he's got his energy bar, and he sits down with an Anderson advisor. And the Anderson advisor asks him a question that he wasn't asked before. He said, "Hey, what's the long-term play here? I know you got this energy bar. I know you're kind of keyed into this organic market. You're keyed into these different festivals he goes to. But what do you want to do here?" And he said, "Well, from the beginning, my whole goal here is to grow this big enough, and I want to get a sale here within my 5-year period of time. I want to sell this thing because I know there are buyers out there for this particular type of business, especially if I can grow this brand." And our advisors, they start working together and they start realizing, hey, there's a better way to structure you, right? What we can do is we can go out and we can set up a traditional Inc. and we can tax you as a C corporation. And if we do this, we're going to be able to save you a tremendous amount of money. I'm talking hundreds of thousands of dollars potentially on the sale of that particular business. Because if they were structured this way instead of the other way, he's got an opportunity for that $10 million exemption when it comes to the sale of that new business. Now, this would not have been available to this particular client if he structured it the alternate way. It's a perfect example of just simple ignorance when it comes to tax law that puts people in situations that they pay for day in and day out. And that's what kind of kills me about doing these events is how many times somebody will take the time on a Saturday to listen to these concepts. They'll take the time to write things down. But the reality is just some people don't do anything with it. They take the information in, but they don't apply it. And they go out there and, end up spending more and more money based on, the ignorance, right? And I get it's a pretty bold thing to say to people, but, when I used to do my live events all across the country, I would stand on stages and say people lose money every day based on what they don't know. And the beauty is always being willing to learn to go out there and take it to the next level. And I'm hoping most of you all have that type of mindset, right? And by the way, even if you're lying to me, I mean, it's nice to see it on the screen. How many of you have the mindset of wanting to learn new things and grow as an individual? Can I see it pop up on the screen? Positive emoji, thumbs up, heart emoji, right? It's just nice to see. And it's nice to see that reflection of that type of mentality to be out there. So thank you for that, guys. Okay, last but not least, this is the one you probably all been saying, all right, Brent, thanks for the information. Let's get to it, man. I need this. I need this now, and I need you to go over it. Well, fortunately, we're in the right part of the presentation for you, all right? I'm going to blank this screen out, and I'm going to go to the quadrant that most everybody show up here for, and that's this. I want to make sure that these assets do not create liability for me. This quadrant will hold our real estate investments, okay? But unlike the no-risk quadrant, these investments, they can and they will at some point create risk for us, totally on their own. But I'm telling you, from somebody who's lived this, they're totally worth it. So to kind of illustrate this, here are 3 beautiful houses. I'll give them some nice, beautiful front doors to make them more realistic, right? So here we are in a position where we want to protect ourselves, right? So the best way to kind of look at this is to kind of visually draw it out. We want to protect ourselves from these assets so we don't get sued personally, okay? So that's down a little red stick figure right there is us, all right? But also, and please let this sink in, also, if we get sued, we want to be able to protect our assets, our real estate assets from ourselves, okay? And again, we've been really creative here at Anderson Business Advisors, and we've called this, very simply, inside and outside liability protection, okay? And I write this down here, and I kind of chuckle at it, but you would not believe the amount of clients that we onboard at Anderson that have solid inside asset protection, but their outside asset protection is lacking, and there's holes all over it, right? And then on the flip side, we have clients who come on board, they got their outside asset protection is really it's well drafted, it's well written, they have the right documents, and then their inside asset protection could be pierced in 20 minutes by an attorney in court, right? The amount of people that don't have both protections in place is staggering. And again, it's one of the reasons we exist, guys, and we continue to grow as a company because people realize there are too many people every single day getting hurt by not having these protections in place. And you might not see it. You might have just got this ad and randomly came across this event on Saturday. But literally every day, business owners and investors are being wrongfully, in my opinion as an investor, wrongfully sued, right? They're going out there and there's ambulance chasers. There's people that say, hey, we can get you this if we go after that part of their insurance and that part of their business. It's ridiculous, and it happens every day. So our job is to protect you from that happening, right? And the way we do that is we use a series of protections, right? So if you guys are taking notes, again, basic to some of you, we're going to get into this detail. We want to make sure you understand the basics of an LLC, All right, how to put together an LLC, what states to use LLCs in, what states not to use them in, and obviously how to structure them properly. All right, so LLC number one, we want you to be aware of what a series LLC is. All right, because 18 states in the country right now, we can use series LLCs. And in fact, I'm going to show you after this first break we take, I'm going to go through a bunch of examples, and one of them is a series LLC. And I don't want anybody to turn off to it, because you might say, well, Brent, I don't live in one of those states where series LLC works. Well, guess what? Neither do I, but you better believe I've used them before, right? I got a couple partners. We went out and we started to buy laundromats in Tennessee. And me understanding what series LLCs could do for us in that state has saved us tens, probably close to 100 grand once we sell out. We sell to a bigger corporation who buys these things. It's very important, even if you're not investing in one of these states, to understand what series LLCs can do for you. So we'll put that out there. A big one right now people love is understanding the value of a land trust and how to structure those. I may have mentioned the fact that I live in the state of Florida. You cannot live in the state of Florida without understanding what a land trust is. I noticed a lot of you when you were participating in the Where Are We around the country, we're from Florida too, key in on that part when we go through land trust. It'll be important for you. And then we're also going to make sure you understand what a Wyoming statutory trust is, okay? And these are all vehicles and entities that we can utilize within this risky investment quadrant to make sure that we are not in a position to have that overexposure of risk to us and our families, okay? So we're going to dive deeper into that on the opposite side of the break. We're going to talk about what kind of things can create liabilities for us, and we're going to go more specifically into it. I want to honor you and honor the time we have together. I'm looking at my stopwatch. It says 58 minutes and 38 seconds, right? So I'm almost at that hour. So before I go into that next concept, we'll go ahead and take a quick break. What I'd love is from some feedback from you guys. And again, I'm asking y'all to participate a lot, but really it's just clicking an emoji. How many of y'all so far are enjoying the process, right? I know we had a lot of the intro to get through and to kind of let you know what Anderson's all about, but if you're enjoying the process so far, I hope that's most of you. You're going to really love as we progress through this, because it starts to get into that point where you can start applying what we're learning and what we're teaching to your own business and to your own future as an investor, which is neat to see. All right, so we're excited for you. I'm excited to continue to teach. So let's take 10 minutes on the opposite side of the break. We're going to go into this risk quadrant, right? We're going to talk about these entities. We'll talk about how to structure them, how to set them up, questions you want to ask yourself before you do so. So we'll address all that over the course of the next section. So let's take a quick 10 minutes, get a drink, and I'll see you on the opposite side of the break. All right, thanks, guys.
I would recommend Anderson to anyone, whether they're a new entrepreneur looking to start out their own business or whether they've been in business for decades and need to establish themselves to gain the same kind of asset protection and anonymity that I've learned to.
We're just thankful to have ended up with Anderson because we are getting a lot of questions answered that we've had for years.
It's more than just you do my taxes, you help me structure the entities.
They've taught us every step of the way what to do and how to handle it.
You have to make sure you protect yourself. It's not just about your business, but it's about your legacy.
Anderson has really helped me really structure out everything.
I just wouldn't want to go into business and do it without them.
jamming. Welcome back, everybody. Let's get this thing crushing. Um, Give me a thumbs up or a heart if you see event overview. Make sure I picked the right page here. If I did that, we can start this thing going. I looked at the Q&A in the break. It's awesome to see everybody asking these questions. Our attorneys have some very insightful answers for you guys. So for anybody participating in that so far, great job. If you haven't yet started asking questions, I guess as time goes on, it usually continues to go more. We've already answered over 100 questions, only been the first, hour or so. But typically it'll start to ramp up here at this point. So make sure you do that. Just to review, if you have those things, those questions, type them in the Q&A box. We see a few questions coming up in the chat box. It's tougher to log those questions. So we have a team of attorneys behind the scenes that answer these things, but in the chat box, we can't log them. So make sure if you're talking about questions, make sure you use that Q&A box versus the chat box. And then obviously everybody knows that, every hour or so we'll have that 10-minute break and then 30 for lunch. Real quick, I wanted to address these things before we jump in here. I went through the Q&A and I looked through them during the break, and somebody said right away, they said, I see the value in a Wyoming LLC. I've wanted to set one up for a while. I'd like to get one set up immediately. Can I do this week? I assume you mean next week, as soon as Monday. Absolutely. For many of you on here today, fortunately for you guys, there will actually be advisors and attorneys reaching out to you today. So for a lot of you, that process will begin today. But for some of you who have things going on over the weekend, if it needs to wait till Monday or Tuesday, that's fine. But if anybody needs these things done quickly, we get it. We understand that process needs to happen a lot of times quick for people. We can definitely accommodate that. Can I get charging order protection in other states? Yeah. Like I mentioned, there's other states. You got Nevada, you got Delaware being a couple of them. There's other states that we structure our clients in. For example, we have one client who has a huge portfolio of self-storage rentals, and certain types of rentals that he has, especially when he wants to offer a 1031, he structures in a different state. All right. We can get into the weeds on that, but the point is, it's all dependent on specifically each and every client. Everybody's an original, and that's how we treat every one of our clients, which is, why you see the retention the way it is with Anderson. Somebody said, do I have to live in Wyoming to set up an LLC? No, I don't live in Wyoming. I got Wyoming LLCs. Does Anderson, this is a good one, does Anderson help correct mistakes that I've already been making? Yes, they did that for me. I have not been my entire career an Anderson client. It took me some time to realize that there were some holes, and I learned sometimes the hard way in that. But eventually I became one, and obviously there were a lot of fixes made. So I can speak personally, that does happen for a lot of our clients, obviously. And then somebody straight up said, Brent, what does Anderson specifically do for you? Well, I could go on for 10 minutes, but I won't right now answering that. But I will just say straight up that what they do is they help me in the companies that I have stay protected. But I'm also very proud to be what's called a titanium client with Anderson, which basically all that does is it's everything that a platinum client has, but it also gives me the ability to have unlimited entities. And for somebody like myself who does volume, it's really important to have that. It's straight up a massive, massive money saver. And I'm talking hundreds of thousands of dollars over the course of my career. And many of our clients, I talked to two brothers who are clients of ours in Texas, and they're probably at $400,000 or $500,000 if you really add it up in savings based on being titanium clients of Anderson. So it's really an amazing thing that they do. And again, we'll address that later. But what I want to do in this section, I want to talk about entities for protection. We're going to go over flipping structure. We'll talk a little bit about retirement vehicles, and then we'll really get into the specifics of how to protect those investments. Okay, so first and foremost, what I want you guys to do is see the screen here. I'm going to try to get this slide up here to show you. This is an investor in California that we have. And this investor, he allowed us to use this example. This was before he started working with us at Anderson. He owned a property in Florida, lived in California, and a tenant slipped and fell and obviously went down the road of suing. And unfortunately, at that time, there was really nothing that Anderson could do because he was completely exposed. The creditors were easily able to find him. And because of the way the property was titled, the exposure was simple, the lawsuit filed, collections, rest is history, right? That is something we don't want to happen to you. We want you to be able to protect your assets from these creditors, and we want to make it really difficult to find in the first place, right? So we want to make it so darn hard for the attorneys to actually serve you because we want them to see your protection, see the layers that you've created, and say, nah, it's not worth my time, right? So perfect example of that. And as a father, this kills me, but It's good to learn, right? Learn from people. We have a very strong contingent of short-term rental owners that are clients of ours at Anderson. And things like this happen. And when things like this happen, you need to make sure you're protected. And a lot of times, let's face it, people will say, well, just buy insurance. Just buy insurance, just buy insurance. A good example of how that doesn't work out. Toddler passes away after staying in an Airbnb that had trace amounts of fentanyl. This was after a professional higher end cleaning crew went through the particular property. But as we all know with drugs these days, it doesn't take much, right? This is a massively disappointing and horrific thing to happen to a family. And because of that environmental contamination, complete exposure to the owner of the asset. Nothing they could do, right? Happened to Clinton Toby. It's beautiful. Clinton Toby are attorneys. They run one of the most successful financial education law firms in the country when it comes to asset protection and tax strategy, right? They had a property in Hawaii that they owned together in a beautiful neighborhood where neighbor put a meth lab in the property. Fire destroys the house, their house, and because of environmental contamination, the insurance company backed out of this thing and says, we're not covering. We're not covering. We're not covering. And there was additional fees on top of that for environmental work that they had to do, right? So it's a perfect example of always making sure you're protected, okay? Here's one of our clients had a situation where her umbrella policy was no longer, right? And again, I'm not trying to make light of this at all, but just to highlight this, you have an intoxicated person, you have illegal fireworks on the property, we have a hand that's no longer there, and most importantly here, you have a rental property, okay? All these things, recipe for disaster. We need to make sure that even if insurance isn't going to cover or cover us anymore, we got to make sure that protection is there, okay? And it's not just for things that are active now. Client of ours who goes out and sells a piece of property 2.5 years later, they get this demand letter and this tenant decides to sue, okay? And me as a property owner here in Florida, if any of you, I know most of you are not from Florida, but we have hurricanes, right? And we have hurricanes, we do remediation on properties that have damage and then they're sold. If that remediation was not done properly by the book, which mine were, but it doesn't matter. There's still attorneys that'll go out there and say, well, that wasn't done this way. Let's go out there and open this thing up and file, right? These are things we need to make sure we protect ourselves against. So what we do is we effectively do that by putting these systems together. Okay, so if you're taking notes, here's a good time to start. What I want to do is draw this out to make it make more sense. Okay, so what we want to do, if we want to protect this right here, something called rental real estate or even real estate in general, the best way to do this is to draw this out and visualize it. Okay, let's assume we have 4 rental properties. Okay, initially, if a client came to Anderson in years ago and they asked for asset protection guidance on these 4 properties, Anderson would focus on one main aspect. Okay, this is what they would do. They would say, listen, if you're out there putting these properties together, we need to make sure we protect that equity. All right, so what they would do is they'd say, what's the equity position? Okay, and I love this because if you ever hear Clint, in a live event or even on his YouTube channel, he mentions it on occasion because it was part of his history. Or you hear Toby talk about this, they're never ones to shy away from the fact that when they first got into this industry, they didn't do it this way. They made, quote, mistakes. Now, fortunately, many of their clients didn't, uh, suffer from those mistakes, but they'll be the first to tell you at the beginning of their career, they would say, what's the equity position? And let's just say, just for the sake of this example, that each property here has a $50,000 equity position, right? So we got 200 grand total at risk on these 4 properties, right? The properties could have a total value of close to, 4 or 5 million or 2 million or, 1.5. It doesn't matter the value. What we're talking about is the equity position after debt. So what they would do is they would say initially, hey, let's take one red box and we're going to provide an LLC protection for this particular equity, okay? But what started to happen, and I love how Clint explains this, he started to get more and more clients that he would serve as their attorney at Anderson. And more clients would start coming in and he would realize these clients weren't investing for equity. These clients were out there building generational wealth because they understood the value of something called cash flow, right? So what happened was, if you take a look at these properties, right? Let's just say for the, keeping the math simple, each one of these properties creates a cash flow of say $6,000 a year in passive income, okay? They can be any size, they can be any number of units. Let's just say for this example, all 4 of these properties create $6,000 each. Keeping the math simple here, we got $24,000 in total income coming in from these particular properties, okay? Now, I'm not here to put anybody on blast or anything, and I'm not tracing anybody's emoji, right? But, if I had a chance to put an emoji up right now, I'd put it up. How many of y'all right now could benefit from an additional 24 grand coming in passively every year to you and your family? That's all I'm asking. A very rhetorical yes or no question, but hopefully I can get most of y'all to participate. All right, keep you engaged, keep me engaged. Now, for all those things thrown up on the screen right now, coming up, right? Every single one of you realize this is why we made the change. At Anderson years ago, we started to realize if you had one issue, right? If cash flow is what we wanted, cash flow is what, Rich Dad, Poor Dad focused on when you read the book. If you had one issue, that cash flow could be compromised. So say this property has an issue, effectively, by the way that they're protected, every one of them technically are at risk. So the possibility for the $24,000 to go to zero is something real and something to consider. And what Anderson did years ago was they said, we don't want to even have that as an option. There's too many clients out there creating too much wealth to go out there and say, hey, all your wealth has been wiped out by one silly thing that happened on one piece of property that was titled this way, right? So what they started to do is they said this, right? Let me get the eraser. Let me erase this here. Okay, get this out of there and these two. Okay, so that's that. So let's do this again the way that Clinton Toby and Anderson Business Advisors structure things now. Okay, let's take these same 4 pieces of property and we'll draw them out. All right. What we want to do is we're going to want to give each one of these properties their own red box. Okay, individually titling them in their own LLC. Okay, and before you guys start freaking out on me, this is tax neutral. It's maybe even better. These won't be filing tax returns. You won't be starting bank accounts for each one of these things, right? So don't look at this as a pain in the butt. Look at this as the ultimate protection, okay? Now, say you have a judgment, one of these properties, right? Just like before, they're not all at risk now. Each one of them have their own box. They are individually titled. So yes, the $24,000 we spoke of can be affected, right? So we'll take that $24,000 away, but let's just delete it by $6,000. We have $6,000 less instead of $24,000 less because we took the time to say, let's individually title, let's see the value in getting it done this way, okay? And this is something that we've always encouraged clients to do. And sometimes it's missed. Oh, you know what, Brent, I got 400 pieces of real estate. Do I need 400 different entities? Well, ask Toby and Clint if they have that many. And they're literally, they can do entities for themselves, but they still don't. Clint and Toby will be the first person to tell you, once you get to a certain position of wealth where you can afford the loss of, say, 10 or 15 or whatever the number is, then you can start bulk titling. But at the beginning of your career, you got to be very, very smart about it and understand the reason we individually title is we don't want to see anybody wiped out because they just didn't take that extra layer, that extra time to have that best asset protection possible, okay? And again, doing it this way, a lot of times there's the misconception that it takes so much work and it's so much more expensive, when in reality, it's really not, especially when you start to get into what Jeff's going to talk about later, when you start to understand the tax ramifications of doing these types of things. It's typically a tax neutral situation, but there are certain situations where it can be better, okay? So what I want to do, if we're going to talk about this and talk about titling and entities and this type of protection, it's important to understand what to ask first because it's going to change, right? We have a group, a core group of our attorneys, right? Which I'll get to later, but we have a group of attorneys right now at Anderson that really help out our short-term rental clients. And we have a lot of them, right? And we have tens of thousands of dollars that are being gone out there and saved on a yearly basis by a lot of these clients individually because of the way they structure. But what's important is their structure is going to look different than a lot of my properties. A lot of my bigger multi-unit apartment buildings have different sets of structures than those short-term rentals because it's a totally different business, okay? So here's what I want you to do. 5 important questions, jot these things down in your notes, all right? Unfortunately, many people, they fail to ask these questions first, which is why we want to make sure we make that change now, okay? So first and foremost, First thing we want to understand is where is the property located? Okay, property location. And then obviously you want to ask yourself, where do you live? So we got property location and where do you live? So we get those first two things answered there. Now we have the opportunity to go out there and ask the real important ones. And you might say, well, is that really that important? Um, California is a great example. If you live in the state of California and you invest outside the state, you will have one structure, okay? Visually, if you live inside the state of California and you invest there as well, your structure won't even resemble this one. There's going to be major changes. Let's take it a step further. If you live outside the state of California and you realize, okay, we got some really discounted properties right now because of what the governor's out there doing, right? Whatever political, I don't care. All I'm saying is there are investors that I know that I've known for 20 plus years that are doing some really cool things in California right now, which a lot of times people say stay away, right? Their structure living outside the state is going to look different than all those other two that I mentioned, right? Point is, where you live, where the property is located is important for what type of structure you're going to use. Okay, now, part that's a little less obvious. Do you plan to continue to invest in properties? And this might sound like, well, Brent, of course, everyone is. My mom and dad aren't, right? I got my mom and dad about 4 years into my career as an investor. They started to realize, holy cow, I could leave my money in this 401k or I can go do some of what my son's doing. Let's see how my retirement will change if I do what my son's doing. And I'm telling you, my mom and dad have lived a retirement that is a lot different than most school teachers and nurses. The reason why is, or the reason I bring them up is because they don't want to continue. Their portfolio is as big as they need it. They're in their mid 70s, right? They're not out there actively acquiring any more assets. Their structure is different than mine because I am. And that comes down to that component I mentioned earlier when it comes to business strategy. When it comes down to Anderson and our clients, it's about strategizing on what the client wants. I want to continue to grow. I'm continuing to acquire businesses. My structure will be different than my parents. Very simple. All right. Number four, we want to understand what type of investments we're going after. We going after the short-term stuff. We going after long-term stuff. These are really important things to understand. Okay. And then last but not least, will you need debt? All right. So will you need debt to acquire the property, or are these going to be things that you're going to be buying in cash? And again, some people can't even understand that there's people out there buying in cash. I never understood it when I was first getting started, but lo and behold, about 7 years into my career, I'm going out there and taking down bigger buildings, cash. Why? I didn't develop this, hey, look at all the money I'm making, let me change my lifestyle. That didn't change, really hasn't changed in 20 years, but obviously there's been some adjustments. But the point is I would go out there and I would retain a lot of this cash flow, and I'd start to realize some of these buildings that I can pick up at 50, 60 cents on the dollar from auction, I could go out there and pick these things up a lot faster and more effectively if I was buying in cash. Point being, if you're buying in cash or you're buying with a loan, might change the structuring of the entity. So those are all things to look at before it comes time to actually put them into place. Okay, so let's talk now specifics about those asset protection, what everybody's wanting me to get to, right? Let's go over how we actually do this step by step by step. Okay, so let's go, we talked earlier about series LLCs, right? What is a series LLC? Well, it's important to understand it by kind of showing it to you, all right? Series LLC, really solid for asset protection. And it can be a really good money saving tool, especially in certain states across the US, okay? And we'll pick, let's pick Texas. We'll write down Texas just as an example. And remember, there are 18 different states we can use series LLC. So it's not just Texas, but we use Texas as an example, all right? We'll pick on Texas and we'll take 4 pieces of property, kind of like we did earlier. We'll draw them out this way though. Let's take 4 pieces of property, go through this scenario together, okay? Now remember, we want ultimate asset protection, and we want to do what the most wealth intelligent people do. So the first thing that we're going to do if we're taking these 4 pieces of property is we're going to set up a parent LLC, okay? We'll call this an LLC, and what it's going to be referred to as the parent company, okay? Now, once you get the parent company set up, you might say, okay, well, let's take these 4 pieces of property, put these things inside that parent LLC. It's not actually how it works. Once the parent LLC is set up, what we can do is very simply, in some situations, this is private documents, so this happens like really fast. What we can do is create individual cells for each one of these properties. Now, keep in mind, these cells are not hard to set up. They're not expensive, But if they're done properly, they provide excellent asset protection. In fact, just as good, if not better, that you're going to get with some other types of entities that are out there. All right. And the nice thing is once these things, cells are set up, then we can utilize them to go out there and buy our assets for asset protection. A lot of our investors do these ahead of time before they ever even get into the assets. And we'll especially talk about that when we talk about flipping. Okay. But in written form here, if you kind of want to see what this means, you create one LLC. All right. Then each additional property gets its own cell. Okay. Really can be as many as you want, 5, 10, 15 properties, whatever. Okay. The process is very, very very simple because they're private documents. And you might be, some of you who might live in some of the states where you can do series LLCs, you might say, well, it's not in my state. It's just as expensive as setting up an entity. You're right. There are certain states across the US where setting up each one of these cells doesn't make much sense. So we encourage clients that are there, just go get the separate entities. Don't utilize the series LLC, even though you have that option, because it's cost prohibitive to do. Okay. And obviously that's part of what Anderson does. Okay. The great thing is, and again, I put a slide here. I can slip here into the presentation to show you. These are the 18 states that recognize the series LLC. So if you happen to live in each, or excuse me, any of these states, consider an LLC for protection. Okay, if you're flipping in any of these states, one cell for flip. We had a investor of ours from Oklahoma. He called up Clint and he said, "Listen, I need a new cell made for a piece of property I'm purchasing by tomorrow." And this was later time, according to Clinton, and him telling the story, is later time business hours on the West Coast. And fortunately, them and the attorneys at Anderson were able to get that thing all set up for the client next day. Okay. Now, we wouldn't encourage you to wait till last minute, but the point is it's something that we can do in a very, very quick basis if needed. Okay. So that's a good example, a good starting example of what an entity structure might look like to protect your asset. Now, remember what I just said about series LLCs, because it's going to come back here in a few minutes, because sometimes the best possible asset protection will require two types of entities being used in conjunction together. Okay, and we'll get to this. For now, talk Florida, right? Hey, I live in Florida. Let's talk Florida for a second. And by the way, don't tune out if you don't live in Florida, because what you're about to see works in a lot of states, not just Florida. Okay, but we'll talk Florida here for a second, because specifically I'm going to talk about an entity that a lot of our investors in Florida get very well versed on. Okay, now let's go brass tacks. Most people, when they're getting started in investing, they go get some advice from somebody. They'll say, "Hey, you got to use an LLC. An LLC is going to help you to protect yourself, and that's the first thing you got to do." All right, so somebody goes out there in Florida and they take the advice of the other person that says, "Go set up the LLC." Okay, so we'll go through this scenario like they did this. We'll pick 2 properties this time so we don't have to draw as much, and it'll make it simpler to understand. Okay, so here's the 2 properties. These are both investment properties. Doesn't matter how many units, how much you paid for them. Let's focus on debt, because most people, when they acquire investment properties, there's some debt associated with it, whether it's private capital, whether it's traditional note, whatever. There's debt. Let's just say this first property, we'll pick an easy number here. Say it's got $100,000 in debt, okay? And the second property here is a little bit bigger. We needed to acquire $220,000 debt total to acquire this property, okay? Now remember, we're going through the scenario that somebody who's never had that one-on-one connection with something like an Anderson Business Advisors or any other really great law firm out there that teaches asset protection. So these people, for this example, say the first property was purchased in somebody's own name. They bought it maybe for, a retirement investment, whatever. They bought it for one of their kids, whatever the scenario. They buy it in their own name and they hear, "Hey, you want asset protection? The best thing for you to do is take that property and transfer it over into a Florida land trust, because that's going to give you that asset protection and that great tax benefit that everybody talks about, right? Right? That's what people do. By the way, millions and millions of dollars are made weekly in the state of Florida by people doing this. And you're about to see why they don't have to do it, right? Anyway, they go out there, say this property right here is purchased with a partner. You want protection, so you do the exact same thing. So you transfer it over into a Florida LLC. So it kind of looks similar to what I first started showing you today. On this section, I said, hey, you want to individually title these assets so you can get the best possible asset protection benefits. Well, here's the problem with doing this in the state of Florida and many other states. What it's going to do is it's going to trigger something called a doc stamp, okay? It's essentially a transfer tax, right? So if we go out there and take these two properties that have debt associated with them and we transfer them because we want great asset protection into a Florida LLC, we're going to be hit with something called the transfer tax, the dock stamps, right? And this is, like I said, state of Florida collecting a tremendous amount of money on this weekly, right? The reality is there is another option. Okay, let's get rid of this. We'll start fresh here. Let's go to a fresh page. We got land trust as an option, right? Great tool. Now, Florida statute says we have ultimate asset protection on land trust, which is admittedly, as I look into this camera, it's unique to Florida. But don't tune out to this if you don't live in Florida, because you'll see here in just a second how it can also be beneficial to you when it comes to saving money, right? So land trust, boom. If we go out there and we take these same two pieces of property we had earlier, all right, this one's got 100 grand in debt. This house right here's got $200,000 or 220 grand in debt. Okay, we want to go out there and we want excellent asset protection, right? So we can deed these things over to a Florida land trust. Now, if we do this on each one of these properties, what we're doing is creating solid asset protection and we're helping us remain anonymous, which I'll touch on more later. But the major difference to us financially is this, right? Here's how, you know, if you're going to understand this and actually apply it yourself, it'd be good to kind of see what it looks like. So, best way, I explained this to my dad one time, kind of like similar to this. What you can do is look at it visually. You're right here and you're the beneficiary of this property, right? So if something goes wrong with one of the properties, it's contained into the one trust, okay? But here's what's really nice about doing it this way. We don't have transfer tax when we go out there and utilize the land trust in this situation. And doing it, especially here in the state of Florida, we have some really, really solid asset protection along with it, okay? So here's a good example of how this particular entity makes so much more sense in this particular state, but yet thousands of people will still use the other one and they'll pay those additional costs when they really didn't have to get the exact same benefit, okay? Now, some of you might say, well, I don't live in Florida and I realize that land trust can still be valuable in my state. Can you specifically show me how? And yes, I can, because I'm living this. I'm actually dealing with this with those multiple laundromats that we own, okay? Because they're in the state of Tennessee. All right. So if we look at the state of Tennessee for an example, again, we'll just write down here, Tennessee. All right. In Tennessee, most people use same thing, LLCs for asset protection. Okay. Very common. If you use an LLC for asset protection in Tennessee, which 100% you can do, and it's effective, what you have to be aware of is something called an excise tax. Okay. An excise tax. Now, an excise tax in Tennessee and many other states is really nothing more than the LLC being taxed based upon the asset's value, right? So that's what it ends up being at the end of the year. It's something your CPAs, your attorneys, when they do your taxes for you, H&R Block, whatever it is, they should catch on to this, and these are taxes that you'll have to pay. It's very evident, right? Now, let's look at this a different way. Instead of going to Tennessee and doing what most people do, utilize the LLC for asset protection, what if we go out there and we take two pieces of property? So we'll use this example. These two properties, instead of using an LLC, let's deed them over to a Tennessee land trust. Okay. Now, the problem is we just spent time taking two properties, deeding them over to a Tennessee land trust. But the fact is, Tennessee land trusts don't give us asset protection, right? The LLC does, but we're looking for tax savings. We're looking for asset protection as well, right? So what we can do is this. Tennessee, right? One of those states. We can set up a series LLC, right? So here's the series LLC with two cells, okay? Those cells will help us remain anonymous and it'll, give us that asset protection that we really, really want. And the way that it does this specifically, to kind of visualize this, for each land trust, instead of the individual being the member, we're going to make the cells the member of that trust, okay? And as you see later, when that's structured properly, that's going to help with the anonymity component as well. Right. So the members will be the members of that trust. Right. So that is ultimately what you want to do to get yourself the best asset protection in a state like that. And that particular setup works in multiple states. Now you might say, well, Brent, what's the point in going through something like this? Okay. I'll tell you straight up. All right. We have a client of ours that we've had for many years now, and he's been somebody that Clint and Toby have alluded to over the years because it's a perfect example of, hey, thinking differently, being exposed to a different way of thinking, and then obviously benefiting because of it, right? We had a Tennessee investor had single member LLCs all throughout the state of Tennessee, right? So he sat down and he did something called his wealth planning blueprint. It's something I'll mention later so you guys can understand what it is. But you basically sit down, you take your entire portfolio, you work with the team of attorneys and advisors, and you kind of look at it all together and say, hey, what can we do to effectively improve this situation? Okay. And after working through the process, one of our tax professionals, one of our tax attorneys actually comes up and says, listen, by my calculation, if we switch the way that these properties are structured to this structure, you're looking at a $45,000 a year savings. And you know, initially the client was like, oh, cool, $45,000 deduction. And no, it's a $45,000 in savings every year in tax liability by structuring it this way. And obviously, guys, face gets a little bit red. He starts to get a little bit mad and starts to say stuff like, well, how have I been working with my CPA for all these years with all these properties? They're in the mountains, right? Vacation rentals. How have I been for all these years in a situation where I've been paying this excessive amount of taxes? And it's because that particular CPA had no experience in that particular state with those types of properties. And that's what you get when you put yourself in front of professionals, is a little bit of a difference, right? So again, I'm not going to belabor this at all. I'm just asking you guys just one time. I'll dramatically write it up here on the screen. But let's just say, for numbers' sake, for having fun, it wasn't this, but just for the fun of it, say it costs this particular investor 30 grand. So he plunked down $30,000 of his hard-earned money to be a client of Anderson. I'm just using that number. It's not what it was. It was a lot less. But just say he spent 30 grand. $45,000 a year comes back to him his first year as a result of getting that new structure. And then year two, another 45 grand. Year two, another 45 grand. Year two, after that, 3, 4, whatever. You know what I mean? So give me a thumbs up or a heart emoji if his ROI, the investor's ROI, is looking pretty good. That's all I'm asking. I'm not saying it's looking amazing. I'm saying, is the ROI in that situation looking good? Because this is what will continue to make me go crazy as an investor. When I go into these local meetings, I go to my local meetings here in Southwest Florida, right? And I sit in front of people and I tell them, hey, the way that you're structured right now, there are some benefits in moving in a different direction. And a lot of times people are so set in their ways, they don't realize that changing could effectively make them so much more profits. And again, I know money is not everything, but most of the time people are in business to create themselves and their families profits, right? I just don't want to give anything away because of lack of knowledge or lack of understanding. All right. So think about it this way. There are states where you can use multiple entity approach to go out there and accomplish multiple goals, whether it be great asset protection and obviously great tax benefits as well. Okay. California is a great example of that, right? Got a lot of people. I saw a ton of you guys from California, so pay attention to this. Pay attention to this if you're from California. So we'll write down California. California has something called a franchise tax. So any of you from California, you know this. It's annoying. It's not cheap. It's like $800 per. So it's not cheap. Let's just say we got 4 properties here in California, and we don't want to pay the $800 a year in franchise tax, but we still want some solid asset protection. Okay, what we can do. 4 pieces of property in California, right? We can set up 4 Wyoming statutory trusts, okay? So these boxes right here, we're going to put WST inside of each one of them, okay? These are business trusts. You set them up individually in Wyoming, but you actually foreign file them to the state of California. So they're set up individually in the state of Wyoming, which, again, Anderson Advisors does for the client, but then they're foreign filed to the state of California. And by doing so, you got $800 a year per property in a franchise tax, technically, right? And admittedly, I'm not a math wizard here, but you got $3,200 by setting these WSTs up in potential savings a year because you went out there and you did the appropriate entity for that type of investing in that type of state, okay? It's a really, really important technique, and it's also something that creates privacy. So when we start showing clients who invest in California, hey, here's how to use a WST, we start to show them it and they're like, oh, cool, it's a no-brainer financially. And then we start to go into the fact that, well, the Wyoming Statutory Trust is going to enable you to have so much more privacy than other entities that you use in the state. And then it becomes like, the typical, phrase we all hear, that's a no-brainer. Oh, I got to do that, right? And the great thing is Clint, very open book about this. He said there was one time he got a call from the Arkansas Secretary of State. And the Arkansas Secretary of State called Clint's offices and he said, I really need to talk to the founding partner here at Anderson. I want to understand something. So Clint calls him back in the Arkansas Secretary of State. He says, listen, we've seen you guys setting up a lot of Wyoming statutory trusts for clients in our state. And he just basically just said, I want to know why. I want to understand why you're doing this. And Clint's example, he's like, first of all, I'm not going to give any information about specific clients, client privilege relationship. But he said, Clint went on to explain over the phone to the Arkansas Secretary of State about Walmart and how Walmart used to go out there and acquire all their properties back in the day, all the real estate that they would acquire through the country, they would acquire it through Wyoming statutory trust. And they were doing this for privacy examples and also the tax benefits and the asset protection. So, and Clint admitted, he said, what we use for our Wyoming statutory trust paperwork is a almost direct copy from what Walmart used. So Clint said, what we do for our clients is very similar to what they used when they were going out there and buying all this land and buying all this property, right? And it's just one of those things where it's okay to learn from others, especially if that other information is really valuable and it can go out there and help a lot of people. So it's just one of those things that you really, really want to understand. When you're holding property, long-term, short-term, there are certain techniques you need to be aware of, and there are certain entities that you need to understand how to structure. And again, we could, go get a law degree, and spend the time going out there and going through all that information. Or you can let someone and let something, an organization, go out there and help you with it. I'm just encouraging you to do it that way. And by the way, I want everybody to understand the value of having good service, whether it be from Anderson or somewhere else. Just have good service when it comes to your assets, because you've worked too hard to lose anything because of simply not being protected properly. And the amount of times it happens to people who are completely innocent is staggering. Staggering. Now, again, there are people that are at fault multiple times, and we'll admit that, right? But the reality is a lot of those times of people, if they have proper asset protection, they're not going to be out of pocket even for the people that weren't out at fault, which is crazy the way the world works sometimes, right? Some of y'all might be saying, well, Brent, I'm flipping property, or I'm looking to flip a few properties and make some money. Well, take a look at this. Here's a good structure to remember when it comes to flipping real estate, okay? When you're flipping real estate, the first thing you want to remember is you got to set yourself up an entity first, okay? You got to set up the business part of the entity. So the first thing we're going to do is set up a corporation or an LLC, okay? We set up the corporation or the LLC, and we elect how we're going to treat the particular entity. We're going to treat this as a sub-S corporation, C corporation, or sub-S corporation for tax purposes. Okay, now once we go out there and set that entity up, and this is really important to remember, we're going to preemptively go out there and open up multiple LLCs, okay? Even before you have the deals, this is a really, really good idea to do, okay? And what you're going to do, and I mentioned this earlier, but let's go through it. You're going to treat these things as disregarded entities, okay? Disregarded entity meaning no returns, no bank account. They're used entirely to hold the flips that we do. And if you talk to your advisors and talk to your attorneys when you become a client of Anderson, if that's the route you choose, they call these things in our organization, and probably others as well, we call them shelf LLCs, okay? So these are LLCs that are on the shelf LLCs. Now, the great thing about having shelf LLC set up is you're ready, right? You're ready for action, you're ready for opportunity. So say you find a really good deal, right? You find the good deal, you buy one piece of property rehab, and we place it inside this disregarded entity LLC for asset protection. We want asset protection now and into the future. So what we do is, if this property sells, this is really important to remember, this property sells, we go out there and we say, okay, cool, I made myself a nice profit on the flip, and we're ready to take on our next deal. But what we should do before we take on that next deal, or while we're in the process of doing so, we should remember one thing. We want to break the chain, right? So what we do is we go out there and we completely shut down this LLC or entity, right? Whatever entity you were using before moving on to the next deal or when that deal is being closed. Okay, so once that thing is shut down, we go out there and say, okay, we find another deal. We go ahead and place it inside this or disregarded entity. Okay, when that deal sells, you go out there and shut that thing down and move on to the fresh one from there. Okay, and the process continues from that point on. And Again, people might say, is it really necessary to do this? No. I mean, there's plenty of people that flip property and they don't structure it this way. But you better believe, if you just take a look at case study, you will see multiple times where people in this situation were sued many months, sometimes even years later, and they were able to come right back up through the chain of that particular business and pull out a bunch of money easily. It was an effortless thing from those charging attorneys, right? And the reason why is because they left themselves exposed in this way. Okay, remember what I said earlier about learning from mistakes? Best part about this story is it's a massive mistake because this person didn't need to make a mistake. They were clients of ours already when this happened. Okay, we got clearance to talk about it. I'm not going to give you any names here. Okay, not to embarrass anybody. And really, it shouldn't be embarrassing because everybody makes mistakes. It just happens. Here's what happened, right? We have a client who's a titanium client of ours. So this is a big time client. Client says, hey, I want to go out there and have unlimited entities, so I'm going to become a titanium client. So the client goes out there, starts his corporation, does everything right. So he does what I just example. He sets up his shelf LLCs exactly like we suggested Anderson, right? And he's rocking and rolling. And right away, and this is somebody who's already flipping real estate, so it's not somebody who didn't know what he was doing, right? He goes out there and he starts buying properties right away to flip. Right away, he buys three properties and he places he places all three of the properties inside the first three shelf LLCs that he created. He worked with his attorneys at Anderson. They created these shelf LLCs. He's ready to go. So he puts them inside these three properties inside these three entities. And he goes out there and sells the first one, right? He sells this first one here. He makes himself a nice profit. And then he decides, I'm crushing it. I want to find some more deals. Okay. He finds two more deals from the wholesaler that he's purchased from before. And the way that he explained it to us, he said, listen, it was right there. It was ready. I was ready to rock. So he did this. He went out and he put both of those particular properties inside this same entity. Okay. He placed them inside the same LLC. Now, keep in mind, this is somebody who has unlimited entities. All it would have taken was a phone call to get two more entities set up, a few days to wait for the paperwork to clear, and he's out there rocking and rolling, right? He chooses to go out there and buy those properties in that way. Now, hey, 9 times out of 10, probably 99 times out of 100, he's going to be totally okay, right? Totally okay. Well, guess what? This property right here, the first one that he sold, had a plumbing issue on the property, okay? Plumbing issue is basically a situation where it was in pipes that he did not deal with. He did kind of like lipstick. He did a little bit of drywall work, but it wasn't all the pipes behind it. There were some things that were against code with that particular plumbing fix, which was done before he owned the property. It doesn't matter, right? He owned it. He sold it to the end user. End user goes out there and gets an attorney, right? Attorney goes out there and comes after the equity in these two properties. In fact, they filed a lis pendens to garnish the profits all on the other two flips. It was easy shutting case, right? Two of the properties, profits completely wiped out. One of the properties portionally wiped out. So fortunately, you say, did he come out of pocket? Well, hell yeah, he did, because he lost potential profit because he did not have this particular property structured properly. Now, you might be listening saying, well, hey, would have been the right thing to do anyway to pay the attorney. Absolutely. He could have had that option. In fact, he even mentioned that. He could have had the option to settle directly with the particular homeowner where attorneys were involved grabbing all their money, right? Or he could have had the option to come to an agreement in a more fair way for both parties. But because he titled them the way they did, he didn't even have that option, right? So it's really, really important to understand structuring and to stick with what works. What works, individually titling when it comes to flips, will make a big difference on your balance sheet, okay? I do want to go through this. I have my whole section here I want to go through on remaining anonymous. This is literally the favorite thing that I do here at Anderson because everybody watching will get value out of this because we talk about home ownership, we talk about residence trusts, how to set one up. It's really fun. But we also say if you want to be the best investor possible, you need to remain anonymous. So it's very difficult for people to look online with all these online options now and find out what you own. And that's a very simple fix. It just needs to go through the process, right? But before I do that, I want to take you through this because this is really important. We see a lot of our clients doing this. If you guys are investing for your retirement, right? So I don't care even if you're in your 20s, you might want to consider this. These accounts right here, you got an IRA, which is popular, and you got a 401k, right? What we want to do is show you there's options to convert these accounts, right? The IRA or the 401k over to either a big self-directed IRA right here, or you can roll these things over into a solo 401k. This allows you to, not be tied down, not be kept in a little box. And remember, you're going to be able to take a non-hardship letter of withdrawal. These are things that we coach you through as an organization to make sure you're not paying penalties when you do this. Now, if you take control of this retirement capital and you want to go do some investing, there are some options that you have out there, right? If you're into taking notes, I'm going to put this on the screen here. I do every single one of these. I'm not going to encourage any of you to do one or the other, but I'm just letting you know, I know for a fact these all work because I do everything that I'm going to write down for you right now. Okay. I know there are others, but just to give you guys that mentality that says, oh, it doesn't just have to be that one way. I don't just have to invest in mutual funds and equities and ETFs. There's other options. Well, hey, you got things changing in the markets right now. Self-storage is an option. Self-storage is blown up, a lot of times overpriced, but you're still seeing mom and pops being gobbled up at 50, 60 cents on the dollar. And the operators who know how to do it, hey, jump into one of the syndications, baby, right? Mobile home parks and RV parks. I have a fellow pilot of mine. He flew for the military, believe it or not, he flew jets and helicopters, and he flew the Osprey for a while as well. Very, very accomplished pilot, very accomplished individual, served our country. He's out there with a beautiful fund, both in the mobile home and the RV parks. I'm involved in his fund with him. So it's nice to see him growing, but I'm growing right along next to him, which is nice. A big one right now that I'm doing with my lending company is the build to rent communities. I am not doing the developments myself. Sometimes I wish I was when I see what these investors are doing right now, but I am fortunately helping them fund them. And what's nice is creating really, really solid returns on capital there. Laundromats, I mentioned those as well, little boxes that spit out cash there. Laundromats have an opportunity to make money. And by the way, people look at laundromats sometimes and they kind of scoff at them. There are some laundromats that we have. I'm not exaggerating. It looks similar to an Apple store when you walk in. That's the way we designed them. It took a lot of money to do it, but we designed them this way because what that's done, if you think about like a community in Tennessee, for example, where we have them, you have the community that needs to go utilize the laundromats for themselves. Can you believe that's only 60% of the business revenue from that particular store? And there's a ton of them in and out of there. 40%, sometimes more than 40% monthly, comes from people that we contract out. The more well-to-do clients that look at this place, realize the cleanliness, realize the state-of-the-art approach, and choose to have their laundry shipped there, folded, delivered back to their door. It's crazy. It's a business service that I never thought would be so popular, and it continues to actually grow in popularity, okay? Private lending, I mentioned that before. Just doing simple private notes on pieces of property. There's an option there for you as well. Now, I had you write all these things down because I wanted to get to the big one. And this is huge. I want everybody to remember this. Most common thing that people do with a solo 401k or self-directed IRA is they utilize all of the capital or a portion of the capital to go buy themselves another piece of real property. It happens a dramatic amount across this country. So people go, they take control of their retirement vehicle, and they utilize it to buy these types of assets. And what they do is they have this massively misplaced misconception that because it's inside this vehicle, they have asset protection automatically, all right? One of our clients, this is the demand letter, IRA getting sued, okay? He found himself in this situation. He had a self-directed IRA, which I'll draw here. The self-directed IRA started to buy houses. He started to buy more and more houses. In fact, these first two houses, he had 15 total houses at the time of this lawsuit, okay, directly through his IRA. And to top it all off, he had $200,000 in cash inside the self-directed IRA that he did not deploy yet, okay? So he's thinking, wait a minute, my self-directed IRA offers asset protection. The answer is no. It does not offer asset protection from all creditors, especially with these types of assets inside of it. They need to be structured in the proper way. Okay, so take a look at this. The mistake completely could have been avoided if you would have just looked at it this way. And if we can go back to that, let me go back to this drawing here. All right, take a look at this. Instead, whatever state we're investing in, so this house right here, whatever state we're investing in, let's just say we're investing in the state of Florida. No, you know what? Say we're investing in Tennessee or one of these series LLC states. We set up one of those entities, right? Maybe you're like me, you're investing in Florida where you invest in a land trust. You set it up that way. thing to remember is if you're going to set up these types of entities, right, to protect self-directed IRA or solo 401k capital, I'm going to look right in the camera. Clint and Toby want to make sure that I tell this to everybody, make sure they're listening. Ready? Do not do this without advising, okay? Do not do it without professional help. We have seen investors try to utilize entities, wrap them inside their solo 401k or IRA, and the government takes a look at the way they structured it and says, nope, now that money that comes of the profit of that deal is going to be taxable. So the whole reason they were doing it inside this vehicle is so they can take all these massive gains that they can make tax-free. Because it was structured improperly, they're not able to make that benefit happen anymore. Okay, so just so we're on the same page here, guys, obviously I'm a big fan of Anderson. They've helped me and my family out a lot, but if you're not going to use Anderson, use somebody specifically, some firm that has knowledge with doing so. If you're going to invest inside your solo 401k or IRA, and you're going to buy real estate inside of it, whether it's portionally or 100% of the capital, make sure you have professional guidance in doing so. You don't want to make that mistake and make that money taxable as a result of filling out a document the wrong way. And that's what we've seen clients do. It's a terrifying thing to happen to somebody when they think all this money they're making is going to be tax-free and it ends up being taxable. It's just not fun, all right? So let's avoid that. So what I want to do, here I am about 56 minutes into this section. So instead of jumping into anonymity right now, what I'll do is we'll take one last break here. After this 10 minutes, I'll jump into the anonymity section. What we're going to do is we're going to say, we don't want people knowing what we have. We want creditors to basically stay away because we're staying hidden. So what we want to do, if you own a house or you plan to own one in the next couple of years, you may want to stick around for this section because we're going to talk about personal residence trusts, how to set up those personal residence trusts, but we're also going to go through what to do when setting up an entity. I'm actually going to show you step by step what to do, and then what entities to start first, because that's a big thing. If you're going to use entities for anonymity to remain anonymous, certain entities have to be set up first in the process. If not, it'll totally convolute the whole thing and you'll be faced in a situation where you don't, people will easily be able to find you in those situations, which we don't want. Okay, so feedback from you guys. You having a good time? Are you learning some things? I realize there's a lot of stuff that I have to get through, so I sometimes move through this a little bit quickly. But again, we still have a lot more content to deliver. Want to make sure everybody understands the value of remaining anonymous. And then as we progress through this, you're going to start to see, as Jess starts to come up there, all these great tax benefits that are going to come your way. Okay. I mean, we have clients who've written us, basically saying, hey, how was that free webinar that you attended on Saturday? Clients have written in saying, hey, here's what I was able to save simply by applying what I was able to go out there and learn at that particular class. So it's nice to see those things come in. Not everybody writes us in, but those who do, it's nice to see those positive comments. It kind of gives us that motivation to keep it going. All right, so let's take a quick 10 minutes. I'll get myself a drink here. I'll look through some more of the Q&A, and then we'll go ahead and make sure we talk about the anonymous section and remaining anonymous on the opposite side of the break. So we'll see you guys in 10 quick minutes.
Only two premier customer service organizations, in my opinion, are Nordstrom's and Anderson. The folks here at Anderson have been phenomenal, and I truly mean that. Everyone I've spoken to has been professional. They follow up and they follow through, and they challenge me on my thinking so that they can help me be the best that I can be. So my wife, Alexis, our goal is to really build a great portfolio to leave a legacy for our grandchildren's children. And so that's the journey we're on, and we're so blessed to be a part of this network.
I get so much more out of the live versus virtual, just because you get that synergy, you get to hear people's backgrounds and stories, and nothing beats that.
Live is just, there's no comparison.
I pick up little nuggets that I didn't realize I knew, but now I know how to use them.